When darkness falls over Kyiv, it falls heavy. Streetlights turned off, households saving power, neighborhoods cycling through blackouts after weeks of sustained Russian strikes on the country's energy grid. Ukraine's president using the darkness in his nightly address.
The village of Bohorodechne, which is near Sviatohirsk in the Donetsk region, is called a ghost village. One will not meet people here. It was liberated on September the 11th. The Russian invaders shelled this settlement every day in the spring. And after that, the village was under Russian occupation during the entire summer. 90% of Bohorodechne is in ruins. Russian state propagandists are struggling to convince the Russians of the inevitability of a long war. Quote, NATO countries are trying to destroy Russia. The West wants to wipe Slavic civilization off the face of the earth. These are the regular headlines of the pro-Kremlin media. Similar rhetoric is found among the Russian authorities.
Some believe that the time has come when Russia can be done away with. Why? Because it is an alternative view of the world, of God, of mankind.
Russian soldiers continuing the fight. They appear well organised and well equipped. But these pictures released by the Russian Ministry of Defence don't tally with the news coming from the Kherson region of Ukraine. It's true that in that city Russian troops continue to fight, but they're being gradually squeezed by the Ukrainian troops and geography.
Good evening, warriors of light. Energetic people who are always ready to fight. Its 246th day is coming to an end. We continue our resistance. The aggressor continues his terror. We are again attacked from the sky by a flock of their crows.
Such as the ATACMS, which I think you're referring to, which is the Army tactical missile. Now, I mean, some of us believe that the Ukrainians may already have a few of these, though nobody would admit it. And the Americans won't either confirm or deny that they've given them to Ukraine, but they've certainly given ATACMS missiles to Romania and Poland. And it's entirely plausible, it seems to me, that some of those missiles delivered to other allies have found their way to Ukraine. And I suspect more of them will.
Russian state media reporting the situation in the Kherson region stabilizing. Less frequent artillery fire, no counterattack from Ukrainian forces. CNN's Clarke reports now from the front lines.
Hello, I'm Yanush Ravinsky, and you're watching Military Mind. Armed conflicts, defense and security, land, sea and air. We've got you covered. And as is the custom, we begin this program with our latest warm-up.
How will Ukraine take back Crimea? In a military way, by launching an offensive like the Kherson direction, or by political means, by calling the return of the peninsula the main condition for a truce?
We begin the day with the war in Ukraine, according to Vladimir Putin. Today in Moscow, in a rare, partly unscripted public discussion, Russian President Putin attacked the West, accusing it of using the military and money to undermine Russia's national security and its international standing. Putin accused the U.S. and its European allies of fueling the war in Ukraine.
And welcome to TVP World. We are in Vilnius, Lithuania, and again we are here because of the war in Ukraine. A war that with each passing day is becoming more and more a global conflict involving the entire international community. How does the war affect the affairs of our region, of this part of the world, the Central Europe? Not only through economic problems, inflation, commodity prices or energy prices, Russian aggression directly affects the security.
When darkness falls over Kyiv, it falls heavy. Streetlights turned off, households saving power, neighborhoods cycling through blackouts after weeks of sustained Russian strikes on the country's energy grid. Ukraine's president using the darkness in his nightly address.
We are not afraid of darkness. The darkest times for us are not the times without light, but those without freedom.
During daytime, life here can seem deceptively normal. But the recent resumption of strikes on the city and the mounting pressure on civilian infrastructure is bringing the war ever closer to home.
In my apartment now, I really have a weak temperature, like most of Ukrainians. But of course, I'm worried. I don't know what we can expect in the future.
The Russian campaign over the last couple of weeks has been highly systematic, targeting not so much large power-generating facilities as smaller substations that transfer the electricity to the rest of the grid, Soviet-era and with parts that are hard to replace. Restoring supply is proving difficult. It's a tactic that threatens homes, businesses and the digital space. Here at Lanet, they provide internet access to hundreds of thousands of customers. Their servers automatically switch to a diesel generator when the power is cut.
The population usually gets information, alerts, news, explanation from the government. It's usually all done through the internet.
People here are having to improvise. Generators are in scarce supply. Disappointment for Natalia and Alexander, who are looking for extra insulation as well, but that was also sold out. Back home, they say they're doing their part to save power, but almost everything in their apartment runs on electricity. For all their positivity, the pain of this war intrudes all too easily. Memories of the last winter, when they were under Russian occupation in a nearby village, are informing their fears of the coming one.
They don't know how to fight a war, so they start bombing the civilian side. Kids die, many people with disabilities already. Horrific things.
Outside, the late autumn night is closing in and the temperature is dropping. Across Kyiv, across Ukraine, people are bracing for a long, difficult, dark winter. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Kyiv.
The village of Bogorodichne, which is near Sviatohirsk in the Donetsk region, is called a ghost village. One will not meet people here. It was liberated on September the 11th. The Russian invaders shelled this settlement every day in the spring, and after that, the village was under Russian occupation during the entire summer. 90% of Bogorodichne is in ruins. Here are private houses without roofs, fallen fences, dangling power lines, and a local pride beaten by the Russian shells, a skit in honor of the icon of the Mother of God, joy of all whose sorrow. Local residents only occasionally come to the village in the hope of seeing that their housing has survived. The house of 84-year-old Volodymyr was destroyed by a Russian shell back in the summer. A pensioner returned from Kyiv to check his household.
Oh, they are already flying. The sun has warmed them up. They are already flying. Can you see it? They are flying, my bees.
The elderly family left their native village in August, which at that moment was under the occupation of the Russian invaders, after the wife of Volodymyr received a shrapnel wound.
My neighbor asked me to let the goat out of the pen and let it in there. I ran to open the pen and my wife went to the garden. Then I heard her screaming at the top of her voice. A Russian shell flew in our garden and hit my wife. This finger of her hand was cut off completely, even the bone. Then that's it. And what should I do? Where do I go? There was no one anywhere.
Taking pity on the old people, the Russian invaders allowed them to leave for Izium, Kharkiv region, which was occupied at that moment, where the women had surgery.
Then they agitated us to go to Russia, somewhere in the Saratov region. Well, everyone agreed and went there, but I didn't want to go. I said, who does need me there, in Russia? I receive a pension here. Well, we spent exactly 2 weeks in the hospital. My wife got her stitches removed and we decided to go to Kyiv.
For more than a day, the elderly couple was traveling to Kharkiv, and from there the police helped them leave for the capital. Recently, having learned that his native village was liberated by the Ukrainian troops, the pensioner decided to return here. But he does not plan to live here yet, because his family house, like hundreds of others, needs to be renovated. Before the beginning of the full-scale invasion, about 500 people lived here. Now it is a quiet place, and only abandoned domestic animals can be seen on the streets. Reported by Dana Kolesnik, Olena Gramova, UATV News. Russian state propagandists are struggling to convince the Russians of the inevitability of a long war. Quote, NATO countries are trying to destroy Russia. The West wants to wipe Slavic civilization off the face of the earth. These are the regular headlines of the pro-Kremlin media. Similar rhetoric is found among the Russian authorities.
Some believe that the time has come when Russia can be done away with. Why? Because it is an alternative view of the world, of God, of mankind. We need it to be a people's war, so that each person feels his involvement.
Such statements are another step towards the escalation of the war in Ukraine. Putin goes all in, political analysts say, because strategically he has already lost the war he himself unleashed against Ukraine.
The fact is that the new stage of the war, which Putin unleashed on February 24, 2022, Putin has already lost. This is obvious, and it is clear even to the Kremlin elders. In order to somehow save their skin, they need to create new circumstances, a new reality. It is necessary to bring the war, the armed confrontation with Ukraine, to a new level of escalation.
Step by step, the Kremlin is dragging Iran into its war against Ukraine. Increasingly, we are talking about the possible full-fledged participation in the hostilities by Belarus. Some activity of Russians is also taking place in the Scandinavian countries, Mikhailo Basarab says. In such dynamics, every day there can be a reason for a big war.
Putin is counting on the fact that China, which latently supports Russia, is a hidden ally of Russia, will be forced to act more decisively in such circumstances. Putin obviously continues to count on the fact that NATO may not show its monolithic nature in the event of a direct armed confrontation with Russia and its potential allies.
However, the chance that Russian calculations will come true is minimal, experts say. NATO has proved its unity during the full-scale war in Ukraine. China, in turn, is unlikely to want to abandon the main market for its products, Europe and the United States.
Question: who needs all these countless gadgets that China produces? If not the Western world, who will buy them? China is interested in being in the system, leading it, but not breaking away from the system. It needs to sell all this. Container shipping, rare earth metals, all this needs to be sold. Russia can offer the civilized world nothing but war, tears and funerals.
Lack of weapons, difficult economic situation, global isolation. In the context of a global conflict, Russia simply has no chance of success, experts believe.
Such a huge country, with such, as they say, potential, with such opportunities, with such spiritual bonds, did not manage to go further than Kherson. That is, Kherson is their only victory, the only prize that they were able to get, but only in the early days. They could not last longer. Then what kind of world war are they counting on? It was just marketing which wasn't supported by any measured achievements.
There is another scenario for the development of events. The Russian Federation may fall apart before Putin succeeds in realizing his ambitions and dragging the world into a new war. Reported by Dana Kolesnik, Valeria Nekapelova, UATV News.
Russian soldiers continuing the fight. They appear well-organised and well-equipped. But these pictures released by the Russian Ministry of Defence don't tally with the news coming from the Kherson region of Ukraine. It's true that in that city Russian troops continue to fight, but they're being gradually squeezed by the Ukrainian troops and geography.
So basically you have over 10,000 soldiers who are in a precarious position of a river to their back and nowhere to go, as the Ukrainian forces slowly push in around them. The Russians continue to hold ground when it doesn't make any sense for them to. We believe that's been because they've asked the higher command and Putin to withdraw, and he's refused.
Further pictures from the Russian MOD, this time showing new recruits getting their kit. They call them mobilized Russian forces. Much of the world views them as conscripts called up to fight whether they want to or not. These pictures show them undergoing training with good kit and equipment. But many stories filtering from Russia claim some conscripts are having to buy their own equipment and that training is minimal. And it seems some of these conscripted troops could be heading to Kherson to replace the experienced soldiers.
Literally, although we sometimes quip that they were cannon fodder, but it seems to be that was the plan with many of the recently mobilized, which is to rush them forward, maybe in an infantry role, but really give them no training and rush them forward in hopes of either holding a position, so it won't collapse, or switching out a more trained unit and just leaving these leave-behind units to hopefully either die or hold something for a little longer. I mean, it's a sign of desperation for sure.
Film from the assault on Stalingrad by the Red Army during the Second World War. Why are we showing this? Well, Stalingrad was a massive symbolic boost for the Soviet Union. The victory shifted the balance of power away from Germany and marked the beginning of the end for them in Russia. Now, Putin's well aware of this history. Could he be looking to do a Stalingrad, but in reverse?
Tactically, it makes no sense, like we saw in Stalingrad, to just sacrifice massive numbers of soldiers and tell them to hold. And there's a lot of similarities here too, that, you know, Stalingrad wasn't won because of fighting. Stalingrad was won because the German forces were encircled and they couldn't be resupplied, which is very similar to the forces in Kherson at this point.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian troops keep at it, although there appears to be a strategic pause in the fight for Kherson right at this moment.
They just fight smarter. They won't fight the Russians the way the Russians want them to fight, which is clashing, you know, infantry on infantry. They just won't do that. They're doing, you know, variations of combined arms maneuver, deep strikes, many forms, but they're just better troops.
The battle for Kherson is coming. Could it be the decisive fight that changes the tide and marks the start of a Ukrainian victory? Or will it be the symbolic victory for President Putin that re-energizes his forces? Either way, it's likely to be destructive and extremely deadly. Tim Cooper, Forces News. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Good evening, warriors of light. Energetic people who are always ready to fight. Its 246th day is coming to an end. We continue our resistance. The aggressor continues his terror. We are again attacked from the sky by a flock of their crows. More than 30 drones were launched in 2 days. The defenders of our sky prevented the enemy's vultures from breaking into the rear of the country and downed 23 Shaheds. In addition, the Kh-59 guided air missile, 2 Kh-52 attack helicopters and another Su-25 attack aircraft were turned into scrap metal. In total, during this period, Russia carried out 4,500 missile strikes and more than 8,000 air raids. But we are fighting, we will shoot down more. I thank the guardians of our sky. I am grateful to everyone who participated in the fundraising for the catchers of such Shaheds. Only on the U-24 platform, 665,000 people from 70 countries. Together, we will certainly clip the wings of all metal monsters, no matter how many of them and from where they fly in the direction of Ukraine. Enemy planes will fall, enemy helicopters will fall, Shaheds will fall. It is only the Ukrainian people who will not fall, a heroic people who will definitely go down in world history. Actually, like this day, it is already history. It's already midnight on the clock. October 28th is already on the calendar. Every year, on this day, we celebrate the liberation of Ukraine from the Nazi occupiers. We pay tribute to the Ukrainians who fought and defeated Nazism during World War II. On October 28th, we do it holding not flowers in our hands, but weapons. On October 28th, preserving the memory of the exploits of our ancestors means protecting their achievement. We remember the expulsion of the Nazis, approaching the expulsion of the Rushists. Evil, which seemed to have been finally defeated and burned to the ground in 1945, is reborn from the ashes 80 years later. Gets on its feet. It becomes possible. How did it turn out? Imperceptibly and very quickly, just as one day changes another, instantly. A new day and a new evil are coming instantly, at the very moment when the world does not notice. Some are sleepy, some are fast asleep, some are not paying attention, some do not care, and in general everyone is silent and thinks the same. I will not be affected. The war is somewhere far away, somewhere in Transnistria. This is the problem of Moldovans. Somewhere in Abkhazia and Ossetia. This is the problem of Georgians. Somewhere in Crimea and Donbass. This is the problem of Ukrainians. We will not be affected. It will not cause damage to us. They will not come for us. Unfortunately, as a result, it becomes everyone's problem. Sooner or later, memories of a terrible war become a terrible reality. The neighbor becomes the aggressor becomes a terrorist, and Nazism becomes an example to follow. It may come in a new guise, with new slogans, but with the same goal. Unfortunately, it is not from books that we know about it. We know how evil can break into your house in the last century, 8 years ago and 8 months ago, violate the western borders, or come from the north, east and annexed Crimea, attack peaceful cities with bombs or cruise missiles, mine the Dnipro hydropower plant or seize the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, drop bombs despite the Red Cross or the children inscription, steal grain according to the hunger plan or threaten the entire planet with hunger, abduct and deport people, abduct and deport children. The form of evil has changed, but the essence has remained unchanged. Evil always begins in the same way. The invaders call themselves liberators. The invasion of one's army is called self-defense. As 80 years ago, the Ukrainian people stand up for the defense of their native land, and the enemy's blitzkrieg plan becomes a failure. Evil always acts in the same way, kills civilians, assuring that it hits military targets only, arranges blockades and filtration camps, and Sirets become Olenivka, destroys cities and villages, and Koryukivka becomes Bucha. But sooner or later, war crimes become known. The reaction of the world becomes painful. The policy of appeasement becomes a tough countermeasure. The evil finds itself in a zugzwang. So evil always ends the same way. The occupier becomes a capitulator. The invader becomes a fugitive. War criminals become defendants. Aggression becomes a sentence. Destruction becomes reparations. Enemy equipment becomes museum exhibits. The feats of grandfathers become the victories of grandchildren. The day of the liberation of Ukraine from the Nazis, on the 247th day of our struggle, becomes a symbol. The result of our struggle definitely becomes the liberation of our Ukraine. The captured territory becomes free. This has always been the case in the past and will certainly be the case in the future. In the future of Kherson, Donbass, Lugansk, Crimea, because our land always becomes free. Resistance becomes pride, struggle becomes victory, and Ukraine becomes united. On October 28th, Russia's only tactic has become terror. Defeat is the only possible outcome of such tactics. Terror becomes a proof of their weakness and a test of our resilience. We will not be broken by shelling. The enemy's rockets in our sky are less scarier than hearing the enemy's anthem on our land. We are not afraid of the dark. The darkest times for us are not without light, but without freedom. Our warriors are strong, volunteers are tireless, partners are reliable, and people are indomitable. The Second Army of the world will become smaller and smaller. The losses of the enemy will become bigger and bigger. I am confident that enemy propaganda does not work. Provocations do not work. Threats do not scare. Any hard winter will not scare us as well. We know that the darkest night comes before dawn. We know that all invaders flee our land in the same way. Gauleiters and self-appointed governors end up the same. Reichskommissariats and quasi-republics die equally. And all our cities will definitely have our flags. Both Junkers and kamikaze drones fall equally. And in our sky there will definitely be our birds, our blue sky, our Mriya. Glory to all who fought against Nazism during World War II. Glory to all who are fighting for Ukraine today. Glory to our people who will go down in history. Glory to Ukraine.
Such as the ATACMS, which I think you're referring to, which is the Army Tactical Missile. Now, I mean, some of us believe that the Ukrainians may already have a few of these, though nobody would admit it. And the Americans won't either confirm or deny that they've given them to Ukraine, but they've certainly given ATACMS missiles to Romania and Poland And it's entirely plausible, it seems to me, that some of those missiles delivered to other allies have found their way to Ukraine. And I suspect more of them will.
Part of the appeal, in inverted commas, of using drones is that they can attack so frequently and so readily.
Yes, the point is that they're cheap. And they're fairly basic technologies. So the Shahed 136, which is the Iranian drone that the Russians seem to have supplies of about 2,500 of, that's the figure that's being touted as the number they've got from Iran. They cost about $20,000 each to make. They are fairly basic. They've just got a petrol engine. They travel about 100 miles an hour. They carry a small charge. They use commercial GPS, so they're not especially sophisticated navigationally. But if you can launch 30 or 40 of them and 3 or 4 get through or 10 get through, then you can make some impact. And that's what's happening. The Ukrainians say that they're shooting down over 80% of these drones, and that's probably true, maybe an exaggeration, but they're clearly shooting down or intercepting most of them. But at the numbers you can use them at, then some will get through and they'll certainly do some damage.
The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called Russia's aggressive use of drones appalling. I suppose that speaks to the kind of the condemnation, of course, for what is going on from around the world. In reality, though, what is the level of aggression that the use of these drones demonstrate?
Yeah, well, it's not the fact that they're drones which makes it appalling. It's the targets. It doesn't matter what you use, whether it's conventional bombs or missiles or sort of very sophisticated precision guidance device or a drone. It's the question of what is the target. And the targets clearly are civilian centers and critical national infrastructure. The Russians are trying to put out all of the critical national infrastructure to destroy Ukraine's power supply for the winter and to deprive it of electricity, heating, water, and so on. And that is, if it's done deliberately, then that is a war crime, straight up, no question. So it's as much of a war crime to attack civilians' facilities, only as civilian facilities, as it is to attack civilians directly.
Let's turn to some of what we heard from Vladimir Putin then. He claimed Liz Truss, first of all, had made a folly and was a bit out of it, saying someone should have corrected her. This is over her warnings around the potential for nuclear incidents and war. Washington could have said they have nothing to do with that. What do you make of his kind of quite personal attack on Liz Truss?
Yeah, well, she's very easy to attack because she says things without thinking. She's a great example of a senior politician who operates mouth without engaging brain. And she answered a question, as I understand it, and they said, would you press the nuclear button if necessary? And she said, yes, I would. Well, a more statesman person answer, a more mature answer would be, we look at every situation on its merits. And I understand the power and don't think that I wouldn't do it. But, she wanted to give one of her snappy answers, which was ill-considered. And so it's not surprising that when she says things like that, it'll get picked up by foreign leaders in exactly the same way that when she was foreign secretary, she gave the advice in the first days of the war that she supported anybody going to the front to fight for Russia, to fight for Ukraine against Russia, which was directly contrary to the advice her own department was putting out. Again, she just doesn't think about what she's saying.
I suppose crucially so far the most dramatic outcome of her comments has been that Vladimir Putin has criticised her. In the grand scheme of things, is that such a big deal?
No, not at all. I mean, Putin, interestingly, the Russians and Putin in particular, they always pick out Britain.
Yeah.
They know that the main antagonist from their point of view is America. But they always pick out Britain because they sort of pay us the compliment of thinking that we're behind everything, that we fix everything, that we manipulate other people. I mean, if only that was a little bit true, I'd be more comforted. But the fact is that the Russians always, as it were, have a go at Britain because it's a way of having a go at America without having to take any of those consequences. So we're an easy whipping boy. And undoubtedly, Britain's attitude towards this conflict from the beginning, given that we've been very solid on the side of the Ukrainians from before the war started, actually has made us extremely irritating to the Russians. But even if you go back to some of the poisoning of 2006 and the 2018 poisonings in Salisbury, the Russians followed what we were saying about those with incredible detail, and they even interrupted programs to mock the things that were being said by the British government. They always pay enormous attention to what comes out of the UK, as if somehow in mocking it, they actually pay us a compliment of thinking that we're quite important.
Yes. Just on the issue of international relations, I suppose then, America's to bring forward the delivery of dozens of highly accurate guided tactical nuclear weapons to Europe. And this is sort of being looked at as a kind of symptom, perhaps, an outworking of increasing, escalating tensions with Moscow. What always fascinates me about these things is that we probably attribute those labels to them, but how are they understood and how are they translated and therefore then acted upon in among world leaders? We can comment on them and the escalating tensions, but actually, do moves like this, does it have a real impact in the real world?
Well, yes, it does in this case, because what's happening is that we are, from the very beginning of this conflict, we in the West have been crossing threshold after threshold in terms of what we're prepared to do to help Ukraine. And so to begin with, we gave them defensive weaponry, anti-tank weapons and so on, which were very effective in the early stages. And then when it was clear that Ukraine could do more than just lose slowly, we began to want to give them the sort of equipment they needed to conduct a counteroffensive. And the thing they really need now, I mean, they've got the HIMARS, which are the multiple rocket systems, which are very accurate and they're very, very good. But what they really need is heavy missiles, which have got these longer ranges of up to 200 miles and so on, such as the ATACMS, which I think you're referring to, which is the Army tactical missile. Now, I mean, some of us believe that the Ukrainians may already have a few of these, though nobody would admit it. And the Americans won't either confirm or deny that they've given them to Ukraine, but they've certainly given ATACMS missiles to Romania and Poland. And it's entirely plausible, it seems to me, that some of those missiles delivered to other allies have found their way to Ukraine. And I suspect more of them will. There may come a moment, a politically sensitive moment, when we admit that we are supplying Ukraine with these missiles, because the Russians will say this is a gross escalation. Well, it isn't. It's only equivalent to what they've got, and it's not a matter of what these weapons will do, but what the Ukrainians use them for. As long as they use them to try to recover their own territory inside Ukraine, there can be no argument. And the Ukrainians are, I think, bending over backwards to indicate that they would not use any weapons to target Russia directly, because that obviously would take the crisis into a different area.
Russian state media reporting the situation in the Kherson region stabilizing. Less frequent artillery fire, no counterattack from Ukrainian forces. CNN's Clarke reports now from the front lines.
Across these fields are the Russians. That means we need to get into the trenches that snake their way through this battle space in southern Ukraine.
So this is the actual front line between the Russians and the Ukrainians. They say that the Russians are only a couple of kilometers in that direction, and obviously there's a lot of shelling that goes on here almost all the time.
A destroyed tank turret right outside the Ukrainian position shows just how fierce the fighting is here. Spent cartridges from cluster bombs and Russian flak vests also still lying around. While some thought the Ukrainians might quickly oust the Russians and take back the key city of Kherson, in the trench, a feeling of stalemate.
There is shelling every day. In some places less, in some more. We would shoot back, but we have nothing to shoot with here.
Inside the main headquarters, the unit commander, who goes by the call sign Nikofor, shows me the gear they use to monitor the Russians' movements and communicate with their own units. He says they've observed the Russians strengthening their defensive positions here.
They have dug in very well for the moment, but with our efforts we are showing them that we are stronger and are slowly pushing them back from our territory.
This territory was all Russian-controlled, but now Ukrainian troops are inching ever closer to Kherson. Having taken out most Russian supply routes across the massive Dnipro River, Ukraine's president says Moscow's forces need to get out of this region or risk being besieged.
They are not ready to go out of Kherson, but they know that if we will have success, they will not have possibility to exit.
Ukraine's military is pushing Russian troops back on several front lines across the country. And as his army displays clear signs of weakness, Russian President Vladimir Putin ripping into the U.S. and its allies during a speech in Moscow.
World domination is what the so-called West bet its game on. But that game is, without doubt, a dangerous, bloody, and I would say filthy one.
But the Ukrainian troops in the trenches say they are resisting for their own country's sovereignty and hope to retake much of this key area in South Ukraine before winter sets in. Clarke and CNN in the Kherson region of Ukraine.
Steve Hall is a CNN national security analyst and former chief of Russia operations for the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. Welcome back, Steve. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Okay, so I want you to listen to 3 of Putin's statements from Thursday. Maybe you can translate the translation at the end. Here's soundbite number 1.
Russia is not challenging the Western allies. Russia is just defending its right to exist and to freely develop.
A little bit of victimhood and delusion there, it seems like. Number 2 is on the use of nuclear weapons. Here it is.
We never intentionally said anything about the possibility of using nuclear weapons by Russia. We only responded with hints to Western leaders' statements.
Just because you say it doesn't make it true. Soundbite number 3, almost out of nowhere, Russia has a right to be straight.
The West can do whatever they want with gay parades, but they shouldn't dictate the same rules for Russia.
I don't know which Western nation is insisting on Pride Week in Moscow, but more to the point, who would want to go? This can't seriously be how Putin views the world.
No, I think what's going on here is that we have messaging to different audiences. So certainly the first and I think the third are certainly directed primarily at the Russian people, the domestic audience. There's a little bit of international audience in there too, but I think his primary focus here is to try to convince the Russians on the first point, for example, that Russia is simply defending itself. This, of course, despite the widely known fact that it was Russia who invaded Ukraine and nobody was invading Russia. So that's primarily a domestic thing that is, I think, designed to pump people up, pump the Russians up as things continue to go badly in Ukraine.
That last soundbite, though, about gay parades, that brings us to this move by the Russian parliament to expand laws prohibiting so-called gay propaganda. Listen to this.
We propose to establish a ban on propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations or preferences, regardless of age.
This sort of anti-gay agenda seems to weave its way through Russia's national security strategy, which lays out who should be protected and from what. Now it's sort of raised to this international level. It's sort of this homophobia masquerading as foreign policy.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because, again, there's a lot of resonance inside of Russia. Having lived there, I've seen it myself. There was a lot of resonance inside of Russian society against anything having to do with the gay movement. There's a lot of discrimination that happens. But this is an interesting thing because when he raises it, there is now a new international audience, which I would argue a number of years ago didn't exist. This is not just the far right wing in the United States. These are the Viktor Orbáns of the world. These are the very conservative, populist governments that are popping up in NATO countries, in the West, this populist movement, which is oftentimes much more culturally traditional and is also uncomfortable about things like the gay movement and being gay. So there is also an international audience to that particular argument, although how it relates to Ukraine is a little strange.
Yeah, it all sounds kind of a little strange. Putin added this prediction for good measure. Here he is.
We are standing at a historical frontier. Ahead is the most dangerous, unpredictable, and at the same time the most important decade since the end of World War II.
Yeah, why? Because, in the past there seems to be this perception that Putin, yes, he's an autocrat, yes, he has a heavy hand, but, Russia had the appearance of moving towards a democracy. There's a parliament, there's a vote, that kind of stuff. Now it seems it's all just got out of hand. He does seem to be kind of crazy.
Yeah, there's very few things that I agree with Vladimir Putin about, but that statement, just taken, as that statement, is indeed a true fact. The next, couple of years in the world are going to be very interesting and very dangerous. They're dangerous, though, because of people like Vladimir Putin, who seemingly, we get back to the gay question and other non-traditional parts of society, it doesn't seem to be able to trust
his own populace, his own people, or people elsewhere in the world to make their own decisions. Now, of course, that's going to come no surprise to Russians. The social contract in Russia is a little different than many places where Russians give up a greater amount of their freedoms in exchange for what Putin refers to as stability. But, the next couple of years are going to be interesting because what Putin is trying to do is challenge, what he sees as Western dominance in the world today.
Yeah, it's just interesting. It will be dangerous. It will be challenging because of the stuff that he's doing in the world, and then sort of trying to walk it back, saying he's not. The whole thing was this sort of closed circular loop of crazy in many ways for me.
It's a very interesting thing that's coming out now. Somebody put it, I think, interestingly, as the mirroring effect. So what he will do is he will, undertake activities, attacking and annexing a neighboring country, trying to keep certain sectors of his own populace, down and under control. And yet then what he does is he turns around and says, well, no, this is really what the West is doing. We had nothing to do with any of this. So that mirror imaging is just a fascinating psychological phenomenon, I think.
It truly is. Steve, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński, and you're watching Military Mind. Armed conflicts, defense and security, land, sea and air. We've got you covered. And as is the custom, we begin this program with our latest warm-up. Now, in the Beryslav region, which in turn forms part of the Kherson Oblast, the Russians lost 2 ammunition depots. Operational Command South of the Ukrainian Armed Forces also reported a successful hit on a Russian pontoon bridge, adding that some enemy military equipment was also destroyed in the process. According to the report, 44 Russian soldiers were also killed, and in addition, a Su-25 fighter jet was shot down, with enemy losses also including a Ka-52 helicopter, 2 mortars, and 3 armored infantry vehicles. Ukrainian forces also repelled 13 enemy attacks in the Lugansk and Donetsk regions during the 24-hour period covered by the report in question. According to the information provided by the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the adversary carried out 15 air attacks and 1 rocket attack during the 24-hour period covered by the report, and fired more than 40 barrages using multiple launch rocket systems as well. The Russians also continue to attack civilian targets in violation of international humanitarian law. Now, after 10 days of round-the-clock heavy shelling and non-stop enemy attacks, Ukrainian National Guard troops have managed to hold Bilohorivka in the Lugansk region. According to the head of the Lugansk authorities, Serhiy Haidai, the occupiers have had the time to bring reserves to the front, destroy bridges and mine the area very densely. He also added that heavy rains made it all but impossible to use heavy military equipment, which can often get stuck in the mud. So let's take a look at how the skirmish actually played out.
Дай Иванович.
Та вагнерівцями. На жаль, у нас були втрати, але попри це ніхто не здав.
Now, Ukrainian company Ukr Systems has unveiled a new model of combat drone known as the Shark. Now, the work on this device was already underway when the war broke out. The drone can operate up to 60 kilometers deep into enemy-occupied territory. This UAV is resistant to the enemy drone jamming systems and is designed to carry out deep aerial reconnaissance, identifying targets for long-range MLRS fire, including from the famous HIMARS systems. And unlike the Polish war mate, this is not a type of loitering munition, it is strictly a reconnaissance drone. Now, moving on, during a recon assignment, a Ukrainian defender unit encountered a Russian BTR-82A armored personnel carrier near enemy positions in Zaporizhia. Following the skirmish, they have managed to capture 3 Russian prisoners of war, as well as an APC, which will come useful for Ukrainian armed forces. And as we keep telling you, those who allow themselves to be captured are the smart ones. According to numerous reports, demining will be a major challenge for Ukraine long after hostilities come to an end. Now, this is because Russia often uses landmines indiscriminately, literally saturating the nearby terrain with various explosive devices, including anti-personnel mines. Now, however, Ukrainian forces have gained a powerful tool which they can use to get rid of explosive hazards in the battlefield. The British-made Armtrack 400 minesweeper, purchased thanks to donations from all across the world, is already operating near Kyiv. Fun fact, you might have seen this mighty machine before. Any Top Gear fans out there? If you remember the episode where Clarkson, Hammond and May were allowed to play around with military gear, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Готові. Рушаймо.
Дякуємо. United 24 в Україні з'явилась машина механізованого розмінування Armtrack 400.
Speaking of landmines, the sheer number of these devices scattered everywhere means that state-of-the-art systems such as the Armtrack won't always be around. In fact, most encounters will play out more like the ones you're about to see right now. Every anti-tank mine can turn out to be a tragic surprise. But the Ukrainian combat engineer carrying the nickname Arkasha doesn't really care for surprises. Instead, he uses his expertise and precision to disarm the mines before they can do any harm. Watch this.
Аркаша, друже, до тебе можна підходити? Підходь поки що?
Поки розкопую.
Так. Скільки вже ти сьогодні цих грибів насобирав?
Я не знаю, треба посчитати. Трошки є.
Що, сюрпризів немає?
Не знаю. Будемо бачити. Зараз штирюємо, дивимося. Та от обкопано так цікавенько. Так, дивись по периметру, поки не немає. Обично ставят вот сюда, вот так вот на краешек, вот сюда підставляють. Вот так вот.
Угу.
І розкривушечка дивиться. Ну і теж треба удобно, щоб достати.
Так, ну я з тобою, Аркаша, якщо що, да? О, хлопці, вони несуть туди. Кінечний результат роботи. Так. Велика Олександрівка. Скільки цього гівна тут?
Ну, маленький внесок української добровольчої армії.
Загальну справу, так? Да?
Так, вроді нічого немає.
Ну що, момент істини?
Так, момент істини.
Так, идеально. Уверенным движением. Чик. Ось так вони оце лежать. Та ні, Аркаш, вони не для...
And for this episode, it's mission accomplished. Next tactical insertion at the same time next week. I'm Yana Shravinsky, and this is Military Mind.
How will Ukraine take back Crimea? In a military way, by launching an offensive like the Kherson direction, or by political means, by calling the return of the peninsula the main condition for a truce? Which prospects does Kyiv see, and what does the West advise? The answers to these questions are more than essential, but now they are subject to active discussions. After all, the first parliamentary summit of the Crimea platform was held in Zagreb, Croatia. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of US House of Representatives, joined it in person, an event one cannot just ignore. What forecasts were voiced? What kind of advice did Western partners give? I'm Alexey Matsuka. Let's us figure it out. Let's be honest, the return of Crimea after 9 years of annexation is rather challenging. Official Kyiv and President Zelenskyy frankly recognize it. Most likely, Ukraine will need some international support and international experience here. The participants of the Crimea platform discuss these issues. We'll talk about the statements of its participants and guests separately. First, let's figure it out what should precede this reintegration. The military way, no matter how unrealistic it might seem in February 2022, is currently called one of the possible options. Moreover, Ukraine is also liberating its other territories. In terms of military strategy, Ukraine's counter-offensive in the southern direction may just have a logical result, deoccupying Crimea. Will it happen? It depends on several factors. After all, hostilities continue not only in the Kherson direction, but also in Donbass, and Russia might be just using the threat of the invasion from the territory of Belarus as a lever to pull back Ukraine troops and eliminate the risk of losing Crimea. Secondly, the success of the military scenario is directly related to the supply of Western weapons. Ukrainian Minister of Defense stated this.
We will liberate all our territories, including Crimea. Crimea is a strategic goal of Kyiv because it's Ukrainian territory. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine.
Kirill Budanov, Chief of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, even called some possible dates.
In winter, the war will largely subside. And after the winter, the end of this conflict will begin by reaching the administrative borders as of 1991. Kirill Budanov, Chief of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine.
The Telegraph newspaper has published the US forecast. The Pentagon considers the deoccupation of Crimea to be a probable scenario provided that the counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine continues.
Russia is not able to defend its key positions, and if Ukraine is successful in its goal of tracking back Kherson, there is a possibility that it will eventually be able to recapture Crimea, the Telegraph newspaper.
Rammstein format has become a traditional place to discuss military scenarios, but the Crimea platform has become a political platform. The representatives of parliaments from 50 countries flocked to the Croatian capital to join a new format. It's not by chance that Zagreb is hosting the Crimea platform, not only due to security reasons Kyiv suffers from the air raids, but also because Croatia has great experience in military deoccupation and reintegration of the territory.
We in Croatia know what aggression is, what force and denial of the right to exist are. We value the Ukrainian struggle for freedom, truth and democracy. To stand with Ukraine is a morally, legally and civilizationally correct act. Andrej Plenković, Prime Minister of Croatia.
Why is this discussion so relevant now? Foreign politicians admitted that in 2014 the West didn't dare react to the annexation of Crimea as harshly as possible, hoping to appease Putin.
The illegal annexation of the peninsula in 2014 should be a wake-up call. Unfortunately, many of us have not woken up. We began to dream of a peaceful conclusion. Putin was again invited to a meeting of prestigious international organizations. Markéta Pekarová-Adamová, Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies of the Czech Parliament.
They hoped that Moscow would stop. And now they understand that this silence resulted in a large-scale war. Nancy Pelosi spoke about this.
Crimea is Ukraine. Unfortunately, we know that Russia's actions in Crimea are only one dimension of a comprehensive attack on Ukraine and democracy. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
Participants of the Zagreb meeting also talked about how other world practices of reintegration. Parallels with Kherson and Crimea suggest themselves. Here is Croatia's experience. The Croatian army captured the administrative center of Serbian Krajina, the city of Knin. After that, 200,000 local Serbs fled the territory. Croatia wanted to return the remaining territory peacefully and offered negotiations. Serbian regular units were already standing there and the area was densely populated. It could lead to human losses. Therefore, they agreed to send a peacekeeping mission and a UN transitional administration to Slavonia, when international officials led all authorities. It lasted for a year, then the mandate was extended for another year. It looks very similar to what they could implement now. Western participants of the Crimea platform assure that now Ukraine has a unique window of opportunities to implement this. They also discussed the case of the Sinai Peninsula on the sidelines of the Zagreb meetings as a possible example for Ukraine. The Sinai Peninsula was occupied by Israel during the war with Egypt. In 1967, Egypt tried to regain its territories by military means twice, but without a success. The parties signed a peace treaty mediated by the United States. It provided for the withdrawal of troops and the restoration of the internationally recognized border. Harsh economic sanctions, the refusal of Arab oil-producing countries to sell out oil to Israel and countries that supported the annexation became complicity factors for Israel. Here is another parallel with Crimea. After the occupation, the Sinai Peninsula was settled by migrants from Israel. The Kremlin has resettled Russians to Crimea in order to have a loyal population. Here is what Rifat Chubarov said about that.
Moscow is aware that sooner or later it will leave Crimea, and this 500,000, some experts say about 1 million Russian citizens who have settled in Crimea, this would be Russia's presence after Russian troops leave Crimea, and we cannot agree with this. Rifat Chubarov, chairman of the Crimean Tatar Majlis.
Whatever scenario Ukraine chooses over time, a political component is also crucial in order for it to be realized practically. In any case, we need broad support from foreign partners, and this is not only about the weapons that Ukraine asks for, but also about diplomacy and sanctions. In other words, pressure on Russia, and we've already heard such promises.
We hold meetings in different parliaments every day. We have signed a memorandum of understanding. We are creating projects to increase financial, military, social, and humanitarian support. It's an ongoing process. It's not a one-day job. We must put sanctions on Russia and support Ukraine every day. Otman Karas, First Vice President of the European Parliament.
Crimea platform participants underline that the military campaign of Ukraine and the deoccupation plan are not the same thing. The occupation cannot take place in war conditions. It should be conducted without framework of a peacekeeping mission, with a transitional period for the withdrawal of Russian troops. And at the same time, Ukraine should have a clear plan, first of all, for the inhabitants of the peninsula. It's important to make it clear which status will Crimea obtain when it returns to Ukrainian jurisdiction. Crimean residents should understand that will happen next. Then further process will become less painful for them. And we already hear some ideas. For instance, let's listen to what Tamila Tasheva says.
We will bring to justice top officials who contributed to the establishment of the occupation regime on the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. Some of the people who did not violate, and this is the majority of people living on the territory of Peninsula who did not commit war crimes. Of course, these people have nothing to fear in this respect. Tamila Tasheva, presidential representative of Ukraine in Crimea.
Interestingly, the Crimea platform discussions went beyond the Crimea issue. The participants stated that Russia's war against Ukraine would provoke further collapse of the Soviet Union, and Moscow's decisions to start aggression only accelerated this process. For example, President Zelenskyy voiced the message that the liberation of Crimea would be an important signal for all post-Soviet countries.
We should make this format of ours, the format of the Crimea platform, a starting point for other humanitarian and diplomatic platforms that will promote the deoccupation of other territories that were once enslaved, from Transnistria and Abkhazia to the northern territories. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine.
Failures on the battlefield, huge casualties and dissatisfaction with the mobilization can cause turbulence within Russia itself. The liberation of Kherson may trigger different groups of influence. They may try to negotiate with Kyiv, Brussels, Washington in order to avoid complete defeat in the war. There is even a version that the current story with the dirty bomb is Russia's attempt to find a way out of the war through negotiations. Allegedly, the aim is to provoke discussions of the possible war ending, but Kyiv has a clear position here: no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine. And Washington voiced this again. The final of this war in the negotiations should be decided not by the United States and Russia, but Kyiv and Moscow.
Nobody wants to see this war ended more than our Ukrainian partners. Our Ukrainian partners have similarly said that this war will only end through diplomacy and dialogue. We have not seen any indications from the Russians that they are prepared to engage in that diplomacy and dialogue. This is going to be diplomacy that our Ukrainian partners are going to have to lead. They are going to have to determine the contours of this diplomacy, what any negotiation will look like. Ned Price, the U.S. State Department spokesperson.
Here are the options discussed: increasing economic sanctions against Russia in order to force it to negotiate on the status of Crimea, considering the status of Crimea in the broader context of unrecognized territories, including Moldova and Georgia, using a large-scale diplomatic resources like the Crimea platform. Surprisingly, the meeting of ombudsmen will become the next format of communication within the Crimea platform. What will they adopt, and will this meeting unblock the exchange of prisoners of war? Follow our next episode to discover it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.
We begin the day with the war in Ukraine, according to Vladimir Putin. Today in Moscow, in a rare, partly unscripted public discussion, Russian President Putin attacked the West, accusing it of using the military and money to undermine Russia's national security and its international standing. Putin accused the U.S. and its European allies of fueling the war in Ukraine. He doubled down on his commitment to securing the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine, and still referring to the invasion as a special military operation. Putin went down the list of reasons for the conflict, but there was a noticeable omission. Putin said nothing about his goal of cleansing Ukraine of its neo-Nazis. He also made it clear who qualifies now as an ally to Russia. Topping the list, China, which has declared a no-limits partnership with Russia. And there is also something personal here for Putin as well. Today he called Chinese President Xi Jinping a close friend. Here is part of what Vladimir Putin said today. He begins by lashing out at the West.
The historical period of undivided dominance of the West in world affairs is coming to an end. The unipolar world is becoming a thing of the past. We stand at a historical frontier. After all, quite recently, we thought that we were turning into a semi-colony. We could not do anything without our Western partners. We can't make financial calculations. We won't have technologies. We won't have markets. All you have to do is click, and everything falls apart. But no, nothing fell apart. And the fundamental foundations of the existence of the Russian Federation turned out to be much stronger than someone thought about it. Maybe we ourselves thought.
Well, my first guest tonight is Bill Browder. He's the CEO of Hermitage Capital and is also head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Bill is considered an authority on all things Vladimir Putin. Bill, it's good to see you again. I want to get your take on some of the things we heard today. Putin said today that Russia stands for multipolarity and for traditional values. Who was he speaking to today? And I dare say that his intended audience may not have been sitting right there before him in Moscow.
Definitely not. So his audience is actually sitting, or his hoped-for audience is sitting in America. And so basically Vladimir Putin is in a very tough spot right now because he's losing the war. He's losing the war primarily because the Ukrainians have been fighting so well, and also primarily because the Ukrainians have been getting a huge amount of military support from the United States of America and, of course, Western Europe. But if Putin can somehow convince the United States not to support Ukraine, then he'll be in a position where he can actually win the war. And so what is he doing right now? He's trying to reach out to the grassroots of the far right in America in hopes that in 2024, with the next presidential election, there will be a groundswell of support not to have Ukraine be funded by America. And so this is kind of almost a Hail Mary, if you will, because he's doing so badly in the war.
Well, there is this concern in the U.S. that if Republicans win control of Congress in the midterm elections next month, that will be the beginning of the end of this incredible U.S. military support for Ukraine. How much would you say that Putin is counting on this GOP grenade to explode on Capitol Hill come November?
Well, it's his only hope, really, because he can't win the war militarily. At the moment, he's lost 65,000 troops, according to the Ukrainians. He's lost a lot of territory he's taken. The people he's replaced are not experienced soldiers. They're getting bombed by Ukrainians using Western equipment. And so he really is he's really playing dice now. He's just hoping and praying that he can somehow make the U.S. not support him. And I don't think that in the end, I mean, I think that there's been a few words spoken by Kevin McCarthy, but on the Republican side, Mitch McConnell is directly contradicting Kevin McCarthy. And so I don't think that America is going to pull out of their support for Ukraine, but that is Putin's only desperate hope right now.
And, you know, for the first time, a majority of Russians say that they favor opening peace talks with Ukraine. That is according to a poll by the independent Levada Center. The greatest support for this is among young adults who also happen to oppose Putin's mobilization of reservists the most. Did you see these trends reflected in any of Putin's comments today?
Well, Putin says he's open for negotiation, but the only problem with his negotiation that he's open for is he wants to negotiate to say that he gets all the Ukrainian territory that he's already occupied. That's not negotiable. And so everything that he's, I mean, he's now sounding like kind of a weak, desperate man, saying he wants to negotiate and getting various proxies to say that there should be negotiation and getting people to criticize Ukraine, saying they're not negotiating. Of course, they're not negotiating on the terms that he set out. That the terms that should be negotiated are a full withdrawal of Russia from Ukraine. And of course, that's not even on the table as far as Putin is concerned.
And Vladimir Putin, today we saw this again. He continues to shower Chinese President Xi Jinping with words of affection. But this often seems to be something like an unrequited love. Putin looking less like a Russian bear and more like a panda bear. Do you know, can you explain what's going on here?
Well, so before this war started, Putin was in Beijing with Xi Jinping at the Olympics, and he probably whispered in Xi Jinping's ear, this is going to be a 3-day war. We're going to humiliate America and the West. This is all going to be great. And it's turned out to be an 8-month war, and he's been the one humiliated, and prices of oil and gas have gone up for China. And it hasn't been this friendship forever thing that Putin has hoped for. It's not like Chinese companies are going into Russia because they don't want to be sanctioned in the West. And it's not like China has done a whole lot of anything other than buying a bit of discounted Russian oil. And so this is kind of, as you say, unrequited love. Yeah. Putin is trying to put that out there in a same kind of desperate way as he's trying to reach out to the far right in America, hoping that somebody's going to come to his aid because he's suffering right now. He's flailing.
Yeah, the far right in America and then Xi Jinping in Beijing. Wow, those are two opposite ends of the spectrum there that he's trying to work. Bill Browder, as always, good talking with you. We appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
The new U.S. defense strategy published today highlights China as the greatest strategic security threat for America. Now, the 80-page document lays out the Chinese threat and then outlines what a future U.S. military response should be. China may be the 21st century nemesis of the West, but right now, Russia continues to get in the way. Here's the U.S. Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, on the National Defense Strategy known as the NDS.
At the same time, the NDS bluntly describes Russia as an acute threat. And we chose the word acute carefully. Unlike China, Russia can't systemically challenge the United States over the long term. But Russian aggression does pose an immediate and sharp threat to our interests and values.
I want to bring in Bradley Bowman now. He's Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Bradley, it's good to see you again. Secretary Austin saying that Russia is only an acute threat. I mean, that sounds a little bit, it smacks a little bit of Barack Obama's assertion that Russia is only a regional power. Is that the message that you're hearing?
Thanks for the opportunity to join you, and thanks for the question. You know, it's important to know that the original draft of the National Defense Strategy that was released today was done before February 24th. And then reality, as it often does, intervened, and it had to be largely rewritten. And so we find ourselves with words like acute being attributed to the threat from Russia and the pacing challenge or pacing threat for China. The bottom line here is any strategy worth its name tries to coordinate ends and means. America's means are extensive, but they're not unlimited. So we have to allocate finite resources. So you have this administration, I'd say laudably, establishing priorities. Any strategy that doesn't establish priorities really isn't a strategy. And they're saying very clearly that China is the #1 threat, more so than Russia. And the primary logic behind that, from their perspective, and I think it stands up to merit, to scrutiny, is that the relative economic power of China. When you combine the hostile ideology, an economy roughly the size of the United States, and a military modernization effort never seen in the history of the People's Republic of China, that all comes together to constitute a threat unlike anything the United States has seen in modern history. And as serious as the Russia threat is, the threat from the People's Republic of China is more serious. That's what the Biden administration is saying, and I think they're right on that.
Secretary Austin today was asked yet again about the nuclear threat posed by Russia. And he said again that he sees no sign that Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons. I'm wondering, I mean, you and I, we've spoken about this before. Are we playing into Putin's playbook here by amplifying this threat simply by talking about it so much?
You know, the essence of deterrence is trying to affect the thinking of your adversaries so they do or don't do what you want. And Putin is clearly throughout this invasion since February 24th has been rattling his nuclear saber to try to impact the actions of Ukraine, the United States, and our European allies. They're conducting another nuclear test. Recently, it's fairly standard, but in the context of the invasion of Ukraine and Putin's comments, it's concerning. I think we have no choice to talk about it, but I think the Biden administration has handled it roughly right, delivering, as far as I can tell, very serious messages behind the scenes while being relatively cool in public and saying there would be catastrophic consequences, but not being too specific. I think that's about the right move.
Ukraine's President Zelenskyy today described Russian efforts to capture the eastern city of Bakhmut as crazy, given the high cost of this attack and the little strategic value that the city presents. What do you make of Russian strategy at the moment?
You know, the Russians have been getting pummeled and have been, we've seen them getting routed and in serious retreat. And the more we learn about the state of their forces, it's just not good at all. And all the momentum has been with Ukrainian forces because of their agility, the skill, the Western weapons that are being provided, and the high morale. And so Putin, you know, annexed these, quote unquote, annexed these 4 regions, even as his forces didn't control all of them and were retreat. And that's a very awkward thing for Putin as he's trying to make this look more successful than it really is and engender fleeting support within Russia. And so there's been this tension between Putin at the political level and his military leaders. His military leaders are saying, we have to do an organized retreat. We're getting pummeled here. If we don't, it's going to look like what we've seen around Kharkiv. And yet Putin didn't want that. So you have the Wagner group in there trying to be more successful. And so there's an interest on Wagner's part to show more success. But the bottom line is, this is just a distraction, I'd say. The overall narrative continues, and that is momentum on the Ukrainian side.
Bradley Bowman with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Bradley, as always, we appreciate your time. Valuable analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to TVP World. We are in Vilnius, Lithuania, and again we are here because of the war in Ukraine. A war that with each passing day is becoming more and more a global conflict involving the entire international community. How does the war affect the affairs of our region, of this part of the world, the Central Europe? Not only through economic problems, inflation, commodity prices or energy prices, Russian aggression directly affects the security. Some examples from recent weeks. The blowing up of the Nord Stream gas pipelines was unequivocally attributed to Russia. The explosion occurred 500 meters away from the power cable connecting Poland and Sweden. Ultimately, official communications indicate that the explosion did not affect the operation and that the interruption in operation of this cable was, quote, technical.
Tests conducted after the incident by PAC and Svenska Kraftnät showed that the cable was intact, unequivocally indicated that the gas pipeline explosion did not affect the power connection.
A few weeks later, we learned of damage to other elements of undersea infrastructure in seemingly remote parts of Europe. Shetland.
The islands lying north of Scotland. 2 communication cables linking these islands to the United Kingdom have been severed.
2 cables, communication cables from Shetland to mainland UK, I believe, has been cut or damaged or sabotaged, something like that. The communication from Shetland to mainland UK is not working.
Let's look at Europe's map. Yes, Shetland lies on the sea route leading from the Atlantic to the Baltic Sea, a key body of water because of the tools of influence that the Russian Federation has over Western Europe. A bandit state that is currently waging the most brutal war in Europe since the end of World War II. It is the Baltic that provides a direct route through which the Russian Federation can try to influence the Western world directly. Yesterday, Finnish seismologists recorded 5 underwater explosions in Russian territorial waters.
Finnish seismologists detected 5 underwater blasts in Russian waters in the Baltic Sea last week, the Helsinki University Institute of Seismology said on Tuesday. We have detected 5 explosions, the largest of them having been of 1.8 in magnitude and the smallest of 5.3, the institute's director Timo Tira told Reuters. 4 explosions were recorded on Thursday and 1 on Friday in Russian territorial waters in the Gulf of Finland, Tira said, adding it had been clear that the observations had been caused by blast and not by other seismic activity.
Again, it's worth looking at the map. There are 2 lines of the Nord Stream gas pipelines running along the coast of Finland in the Gulf of Finland. Let's take a look. According to information available in the Finnish media, Finland, and that's a quote, does not intend to investigate these explosions further due to the fact that they occurred inside Russian territorial waters. However, the mere fact that this information was passed on to the public is important. During the last 4 weeks, there have been obvious acts of sabotage at the key location for sea lanes and international economic and military relations, as in the case of blowing up the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, alleged facts of sabotage as in the case of cutting off the communications of the Shetland Islands, a British territory, and 5 mysterious underwater explosions near critical infrastructure along the coast of Finland, a country that is just fine-tuning its NATO membership. And to this information should be added another concerning what is happening around Königsberg, or Kaliningrad as Russians say, a Russian enclave inside NATO and European Union territories. Indeed, Königsberg Airport signed an open skies agreement in recent days, a peculiar agreement in a way.
Kaliningrad Krabrovo Airport has signed open skies agreements with Turkey, Syria and Belarus. This allows foreign carriers to launch connections from given destinations to Kaliningrad.
Given the experience of Poland and Lithuania in 2021, it is clear what kind of scenario the Russian regime of war criminal Vladimir Putin, who is currently a leader of a Russian regime, is preparing in the so-called Suwalki Gap, a key location from the perspective of NATO's eastern flank defense. The borderland between Russia, Belarus and between Lithuania and Poland may once again become the site of Russian provocations. In this regard, a few days ago we learned information about the planned construction of another dam, this time between Poland and Russia, specifically the Königsberg, or as Russians call it, Kaliningrad region.
We will have to strengthen our forces on this section of the border, also probably think about building similar border fortifications as there are now on the Polish-Belarusian section.
It was one of the senior figures of a ruling party in Poland speaking for Polish radio. Certainly, as in 2021, whatever actions the Russian Federation carries out in this part of Europe, they will certainly be hostile to both Poland, Lithuania and all other Western countries of the region. Indeed, it's going to be hostile against the whole NATO and European Union. Our 2 countries, Poland and Lithuania, have been cooperating on matters of direct hard security for years. And this is cooperation that has a very concrete military dimension. It is the skies of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia and Poland that have been protected for years by NATO air policing mission. This is how Clément Charpentier, a Vilnius-based French journalist covering military aviation, spoke about this mission on our program.
The NATO Baltic Air Policing Mission was established in 2004. So that's when the Baltic states joined NATO. And basically the goal was to give those nations that didn't have or had very limited airborne capabilities of their own, the capacity to protect their own airspace. So to do that, there's a rotation that happens every, several times per year of NATO air forces moving to a base in Šiauliai, Lithuania, Almari in Estonia, and Malberg also in Poland.
But there is also another military project underway right now that has sent the world's most modern fighter jets, the US F-22 Raptor aircraft, to NATO's eastern flank. This is the NATO Air Shielding mission.
This one, which actually started even before the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine with what's called the enhanced vigilance activity, and where fighter jets were sent on the eastern border of NATO countries to basically act as a deterrent to any Russian incursion onto NATO territory. So the mission did not really change in its goal, but in its volume.
This mission is conducted from the Polish base in Łask. The Polish Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and Mariusz Błaszczak were there recently.
Today, Polish pilots, together with American pilots, not only patrol the Polish sky, but also take care of the security of the entire eastern flank of NATO. Here in Łask, soldiers of the Polish Air Force and the US Air Force practice together on a daily basis, covering the skies over Poland. This is the practical dimension of building interoperability between the Polish Armed Forces and the US Armed Forces.
The deployment of US Air Force and the most modern and powerful fighter jets currently flying in the world's armed forces are signals sent toward a country that has long understood aggression in Ukraine as part of aggression against the collective West. The last few days, among other things, have seen further threats coming from Russia, but also communications from talks between the US and the Russian Federation regarding those threats.
US Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley spoke with his Russian counterpart Monday, agreeing to keep lines of communication open amid growing fears that Russia may further escalate its war in Ukraine. Milley and Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the Russian General Staff, discussed several security-related issues of concern, the Pentagon said in a statement in the first call between the two since May. The statement said further details wouldn't be provided.
Already after these talks, meetings were held in many countries around the world regarding the Russian threat of war in Ukraine. Such a meeting was also held in Poland by Poland's president. The chief of his security office, Jacek Siewiera, spoke on the matter.
The information that Minister Shoigu provided in the talks and the positions that the allies are taking clearly identified the risks and serious consequences that may be associated with possible provocations involving the use of any form of nuclear weapons, including tactical nuclear weapons or dirty bomb.
The location of Poland and Lithuania, as well as other countries on NATO's eastern flank, makes it necessary for our countries to work together to stop what has been happening near our borders for a long time. The Russian Federation, losing one battle after another, being close to losing the only regional city in Ukraine captured so far, Kherson, is waging a war of nerves. And in this war of nerves, the answers coming from Western countries today sound unequivocal. They are being sent by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg from the deck of the USS George Bush aircraft carrier in the Adriatic Sea.
Russia now falsely claims Ukraine is preparing to use a radiological dirty bomb on its own territory. NATO allies reject this transparently false allegation. Russia often accuses others for what they intend to do themselves.
The NATO Secretary General, by the way, also sent another signal describing the forces that only the one group of US troops located in the Adriatic Sea around this aircraft carrier, George Bush, has at its disposal at the moment.
This NATO deployment includes over 80 aircraft, 14 ships, and around 6,000 personnel from 24 NATO allies and partners, including Finland and Sweden. Neptune strike tests our readiness to deter and defend across the Euro-Atlantic area. Just a few days ago, US Navy F-18s flew from this carrier to Lithuania, working alongside our allies France, Latvia, and Hungary along the way. And last week, your F-18s joined Canadian fighter aircraft for patrols over Romania, refueled in the air by Dutch tanker aircraft. So this exercise is a perfect example of the transatlantic bond. Europe and North America working together in NATO.
In more blunt terms toward Russia, the captain of the aircraft carrier, Dave Pollard, spoke on Sky News TV lately.
We are always ready to execute the full spectrum of maritime operations.
So you'd be ready to go to war if the call came?
If we are directed, certainly that's what we prepared for. But what we are also here is to bring peace and stability.
And that's what we are going to talk about on my show. My name is Michał Rachon, this is Rock Rachon, and we're rolling. Our first and only guest tonight on Rock Rachon is Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Mr. Gabrielius Landsbergis. Mr. Gabrielius Landsbergis was hosting us in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, here in the country's capital, Vilnius. Mr. Landsbergis, thanks for hosting us here in Ministry of Foreign Relations. Mr. Landsbergis, before we start, what is your assessment? What is assessment of Lithuania of the current situation of the war in Ukraine, Russian attack on Ukraine, and the role of countries of our region in this conflict?
I think that the bottom line is that Russia is losing. It did not manage, so to say, according to Putin's plan, to take Kiev in 3 days. It's losing territories. In parts, some of the territories were breached, even those who were held even before the 24th of February. What we're seeing currently, the attacks using Iranian-produced drones on civilian targets, they do remind of the times of the Second World War, when Nazi Germany was losing. It started bombing with V1 and V2 rockets London. Same way, civilian targets, same way civilians were dying in the streets of United Kingdom, in the cities of United Kingdom. But that shows that the same desperation that Nazi Germany had in 1944, the same desperation Putinist Russia has now.
You and other leaders of the countries of the region proposed establishing a special tribunal for war crimes. Do you think that Vladimir Putin and his inner circle and the decision makers in Russia will face international justice and will face this kind of war tribunal?
I think they have to. It's imperative. Soviet Union did not face any justice after we broke free, even though we've asked. We've asked our international partners to join us in search for justice when it came to decades of occupation, in hundreds of thousands of people who were deported to Siberia. We asked for justice to them. It was never provided. And I think that if justice would have been served to Soviet Union, maybe we would not find ourselves in the current situation where we are now. So it is a moral obligation to ask for justice for Ukraine.
Mr. Minister, there were no Nuremberg for communism, for people with the memory of this totalitarian enslavement system. This is something that was never addressed, basically. Do you think that the war in Ukraine right now is a chance to, also for this aspect of justice in a broader sense? Vladimir Putin is a man of KGB, is a man of those totalitarian structures.
Absolutely. I think that you put it in exactly the same, the question is exactly put in that fashion that we are thinking here in Lithuania. We would not be asking for justice for Lithuania in the same court where Ukraine would be defended, and Ukraine's right to have a peaceful and with full territory country, but I think that we will stand together with Ukraine on this. And yes, I think that this court, from the moral perspective, when it would pass a judgment, it would be a judgment also for the crimes that were done against Lithuania, against Poland, and against other countries that suffered Soviet rule.
Mr. Minister, what is the manner that you as a political leader, Lithuania as a country, and other countries that are supporting this kind of idea want to execute and to change the political idea into a real action in terms of prosecuting Vladimir Putin and people who are responsible for war crimes in Ukraine?
I think that there's, from practical perspective, there is no other chance as to create a special tribunal, the one that would resemble Nuremberg.
As Nuremberg.
Yes. But what we can do now to convince the partners, since the agreement is not yet there, as always, use our voice and speak up and speak loud, explain our position. There has never been a time in the last 3 decades when the voice of the countries in the Baltics, the voice of Poland would have been heard as loud as it is heard now. So again, I'm speaking a lot about moral obligation, but I feel that it is there.
Well, this is something which, at least from the perspective of people who know the nature of this Russian imperialism, it is something absolutely fundamental in terms of millions of people who lost lives over the span of the 20th century. But there is a question also of the current political scene, international political scene. Russia enjoys the position of superpower basically because it is a member of the United Nations Security Council. Should it change after this war? Should Russia remain a country with this kind of international status after war in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I don't think that Russia is in any way a global superpower.
Well, it is referred to as because of this.
Yes, I understand the layout, but I think that it has to be said that it's a declining regional power with a very big red button. That's the only thing that gives Russia a chance even now to threaten other countries in the region or even globally. So we have to take it as it is. Should stance change? Should the reality change? Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the debate that is ongoing, whether a permanent member of Security Council could be or should be suspended, that's an excellent question. I think definitely, because a few weeks ago there was a UN report published which stated a quite obvious fact that rape is being used as an instrument of war by Russia. And I tried to imagine what it would be to sit in the Security Council for other permanent members when a country that is established, that is using rape as an instrument of war, is sitting beside them. Are they asking this question every morning when they meet up in the Security Council?
Yeah, and they're holding a veto power.
Yes, exactly. And I think that it should at least make people uneasy, because it's called a Security Council. And you have a country that is doing horrible, horrible things as we speak.
Mr. Minister, speaking of a red button, let me quote what you just said on the LRT radio here in Lithuania. Moscow claims that Ukraine is in the final stages of developing a dirty bomb. And those claims have to be taken very seriously because this situation is very reminiscent of Russia's statement in the run-up to February 24th when false information was being spread about allegedly existing chemical plants in Ukraine. What do you mean by saying that those claims should be treated seriously?
I remember very well when even exactly a year ago, when Putin and Lavrov and others in Russia's political establishment started making claims against Ukraine, accompanied with warnings from our allies in NATO. For us, it was very clear that Russia is preparing for something really bad. Not everybody took that seriously. We lost some very precious time in order to prepare, to support Ukraine. Lithuania did provide weapons quite early, did provide training quite early, but not everybody did so. Because maybe the claims were not taken as seriously as they should have been. So this time, I think that we need to hear what is being told us. We should not be afraid. We should not be paralyzed by what we hear from Moscow, but we should prepare. We should prepare ourselves. We should prepare defense plans. We should prepare Ukraine, especially Ukraine, for them to have a better fighting chance.
You tweeted lastly that the heavy weapons should be provided to Ukraine fast. You also mentioned in a couple of interviews very important words of Ursula von der Leyen during her State of the Union speech that countries of our region, Lithuania, Poland, were right in terms of the Russian threat. Did you find any political action that is following this obvious and important statement? Are we all on the same page in terms of support for Ukraine now, after the statement?
Well, I'm very glad that the statement was made. It makes me proud for my country, for the region, that we are acknowledged as the ones who have understanding, who have good insights into, I'd say, Russian psyche, how they are thinking, what could be their actions and activities. But as it is, we still need to remind our friends and allies in Europe and in the transatlantic community that if you say that Baltics, Poland, other countries were right, listen to us now. And when we're saying that there's no argument, there's no reason why we should not be giving everything that we have to Ukraine to make them stronger, to make them win faster. So listen to us now.
So if those politicians from France or Germany were to listen to you right now, after those dirty bomb claims, what is your assessment of what we are hearing right now? What is the game plan? What is the scenario here that is being played out in front of our eyes?
I would outline probably two things that, in my mind, need to be done. First of all, just repeat what I've said. We need to give Ukraine a better fighting chance. If we have provided anti-missile, anti-air defense 2 months earlier, when the first reports were issued, that there's a chance that Russia is collaborating with Iran. If Ukraine had the weaponry, the defense weaponry that it has now, many lives would have been saved. So the question needs to be asked, what do we have in store that we would plan to give Ukraine in 2 months, and give it now?
The thing is that we are talking about the European allies of and European Union members and NATO member states. We do have a NATO drill right now being played on the Adriatic Sea. We do have a presence of NATO vessels on the Baltic Sea. Jens Stoltenberg holding a press conference on USS George Bush aircraft carrier, something maybe not very common. I haven't heard and I haven't seen many of press conferences of NATO Secretary General on the board of an aircraft carrier. He said that F-18 planes were sent from this aircraft carrier to Lithuania. He mentioned some other air operations. We do have air policing here, we do have NATO air shielding with F-22s, some brand new modern aircrafts here. What is the meaning of these actions from the Lithuania standpoint?
It could be a reaction towards the escalatory language that we're hearing from Moscow. It is a very important signal to us, to the region, that is being noted, it's being addressed. From our side, what we've been asking, actually even before the war, especially after the war, we need more NATO presence in the region, on the eastern flank. We've discussed that in Madrid, about the need to have brigade combat-ready units in all 3 Baltic states. So I truly wish that in the eye of everything that we're seeing in the region, with troops being brought in Belarus, they're being probably trained there. You know, we know about the troop presence in Kaliningrad. We know about nuclear exercise that Russia is holding. We've seen a Nord Stream sabotage in the Baltic Sea. With everything that is happening, I think that the calendar for bringing in the brigades has to be sped up, and those brigades, we would very much appreciate if they would appear in the Baltic states sooner.
Mr. Minister, there are 2 more things I'd like to have your say on. One of them is the experience of Lithuania from 2021 of the artificial migration crisis caused by Belarus. We do have information about the Kaliningrad or Königsberg, or as Russians say, Kaliningrad region writing and signing an open skies treaty with the countries known for exporting illegal migrants. What do you expect of this in the near future?
I think that what the issue has taught us, we need to be vigilant. That non-friendly countries, aggressive countries, those who are fighting war against Ukraine, they can think of the ways how to harass their neighbors. And yes, they tried that with migrants. They can definitely do that again in the future. We need to be ready. We need to be prepared. We have some instruments worked out. Lithuania has significantly boosted its border security on the Belarusian side. We're looking into the ways if there is something that we can still do on a Kaliningrad side. So we've learned our lesson. We would not be caught off guard in that question.
Mr. Minister, there is also a question that I'd like to ask from the position of Poland. Did you have a significant dispute here over the issue whether to give the free pass to those illegal migrants sent over by Lukashenko, or was it commonly agreed among the Lithuanian politicians that Lithuania as a state should oppose this kind of hostile activity? From the very beginning, we looked for the ways how to stop the flows, because we knew that they are engineered. Lithuania does not have a border with Iraq, does not have a border with Syria. That means that people need to be brought into Belarus, and we knew that it was planned, and even some intelligence agents from the Belarusian side were taking part in the whole operation. So definitely, it was a hostile act against us, but also against those people who are being brought to us. We've tried to work, and successfully to work with the European Commission in order to change the attitude as much as we can, in order to show that it's a different kind of problem and it needs a different kind of approach. And I think that I can say that we succeeded. You succeeded within your own political scene as well? I would say yes. The political scene was not divided. We've agreed that this is important. This is a national security question that has to be handled together. Mr. Minister, my final question is a question of a thing that is in one of the things that are being disputed between Poland and Lithuania right now, the issues of the Polish schooling system in Lithuania. Do you find any possible solution that can be satisfactory for both sides, Poland and Lithuania? Well, first of all, it's Lithuanian education system, and we're taking this very seriously. We appreciate the attention that we're getting from Polish politicians, but we always have to remind that we're definitely taking it seriously, but also working ourselves to find a solution. I'm sure that the solution will be found. Mr. Minister, final question. The whole atmosphere of what is going on right now on the eastern flank is, in a way, you mentioned the red button from the Russian arsenal. Do you think that the threat, the nuclear threat that we are hearing about, is a threat that should be addressed, or what is the way that this kind of threat should be addressed by the Western politicians, by the NATO, by the European Union countries, states?
The only way to address it is not to give in to blackmail and show that there's a resolute answer possible and ready in case of that sort of escalation. If we give in to blackmail, to nuclear blackmail, we have to ask ourselves the question, where will it stop? There are other actors globally who have nuclear weapons, and if Russia is successful, they might think that they have a free passage to do the same thing.
Mr. Minister, thank you for your time. Thanks for hosting us here in your ministry.
Thank you so much.
And all the best for great people of Lithuania.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this show comes back on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, it looks like we are going to be back in office. Till that day.